Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you believe it? We are actually at the last webinar in our 2021 webinar series for CARICAD. And we are certainly ending our webinar series for 2021 with a bang, because for this webinar, we almost broke the platform. We have our maximum number of registrants, 500. And so we are really glad for that. So Robertine, if you don't mind, you don't need to turn on your camera. You could keep it off. That's okay. Great. So I think you should consider yourself privileged. You were able to register for the webinar, but not to worry. We are recording it, and we're going to make it available not only to you, but to others who were not able either to be here, registered but not able to be here live, but even beyond that, we'll be sharing across our various social media platforms in the future. My name is Dr. Loy Parks. I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist here at the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, CARICAD. And it is my delight to be your host for today, and joining me in doing the virtual production in the background, but equally important, is my colleague Raphael Greaves. So we are using a WebEx platform. I am not going to assume that everybody is necessarily fully familiar, although I see a number of familiar names, a number of persons who regularly attend, people who are part of our alumni. So a special welcome to those who are regular persons, visitors, participants, a part of our community of practice of leaders, and for those who might be new, welcome. Once you come, we consider you part of the CARICAD family. So just to make sure we all get the best out of this virtual learning experience, just remind us or to share with us some ground rules. So we want to just make this a very intense, short but intense learning experience. So we want to close all of your software applications apart from WebEx, and to mute your various phones. If you can't mute your phones, you can turn the ringers down as far as you can. And remind your colleagues that for the next hour and 15 minutes, you are not available. We know that bandwidth can be an issue when we are learning in the virtual space. So to try and get the best possible bandwidth and the best possible audio experience, we recommend, if you have an internet cable, to plug that in. And if you are thinking of participating by, getting your microphone unmuted and going to, air your views, which we will create that space for that if you wish. Then if you have a good working headset and microphone, it's best that you use that. All right. Now, just to make sure we know how to fully engage in this process, I'm just going to share with you a few of the main feedback tools that will help you to engage in this webinar. So you will see, if you're on a laptop or desktop, this toolbar you will see to the right of your screen below the list of names. If you're logging in on a mobile device, those features should be there too, but just not in the same location. And so the toolbar, you'll see the raise hand feature. And so when the time comes when we're taking questions and comments and you want to have your mic unmuted, then you just raise your hand, and myself and Raphael, we will see that hand and we will take you in turn. If you wanted to just to respond using other reactions, yes, so right beside the raise hand feature is the green check mark, and besides that is the red X. So let's just say we threw out a question and you wanted a yes or no response, you could tick either the green check mark or the red X. And of course, I see that many of you already would have seen the chat feature. And we know that's a feature we use a lot, and please do continue to use it. So if you want to send a comment for all of us, especially our facilitators, to see, then send it to all participants. Just simply type your text in that text box space and just click on send. All right. And then the other two, it becomes a receipt here, and you can wherever you wish. Now, those who are logging on a mobile device may not see that feature, and that's fine. What I want you to do, if you can access that feature, I want you to just tell us where you're joining us from today. So Nicholas, hi, Nicholas Rock from CXC there in Barbados. Michelle from TNT, yes, I see our alumni in the house. Vicky is joining from BVI. Welcome, Vicky. And if you have the chat feature, just tell us which country are you joining us from today. So Fernando, well, I don't want to say you're our chief librarian from the government of Dominica, because she may have gotten a promotion, I don't know. But Fernanda and Sam are joining us from Dominica, Felicia and Keita from St. Lucia, and Patricia from the Accountant General Department there. That's the Ajodia from Public Service Academy in TNT. Fantastic. Heidi and Faye from Barbados. Awesome. I'll say also joining from Jamaica, Yannick. I think your point is in Jamaica, yes. I am also joining from Jamaica, and I'm seeing the chat. All people are joining from all over. We're having a real CARICOM experience here. So Sonia from the OECS Commission, welcome. Sonia, I am so glad to have you. No, I'm not saying we have never had people joining us from the OECS Commission before, but certainly you're the one that I remember, Sonia. Welcome. Risa joining from Barbados, Celeste from St. Lucia, Juanita from Dominica, Pamela from BVI, as well as Tamika and Desari. Fantastic. Simra, hi Simra. Simra is one of our alumni. Did our Leading Change workshop earlier. Hi Simra. Jennifer from BVI as well, welcome. Oh my, BVI is in the house. Lorna and Linda. Yannick Sarti from Jamaica, welcome. Siobhan from BVI, Shonda from BVI, Russell from Jamaica, Valerie from SALCC, St. Lucia, Richard from Montserrat, Gerald from Trinidad, Anisha Grenada, June from TNT, Kadeen from Jamaica, Bolani from Grenada, Del Rose from Montserrat, Alvona from Anguilla, Paige from Jamaica, Shanique Brown from Jamaica, John from the beautiful Belize. Oh yes, welcome John. Cheryl from St. Lucia, Judith from BVI, Christine Hendricks from Jamaica, Rihanna from Guyana, Everett from TNT. Marjorie says, no, she doesn't say Montserrat, you know, she says Montserrat, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. Oh yes. Kathy, also from SALCC. I think this is your library, your national library. I think that might be. That is Kathy from St. Lucia. Welcome. Kathy Ann from Trinidad, Winston from St. Vincent, Crystal from TNT, Marsha from Jamaica, Jacqueline Sargent from Anguilla, Maisa from Post and Telecommunications Department in Jamaica. Welcome. Natasha, Jamaica, Keturah and Shay. So there are some people who, they're not them alone, they log on with partners. So that is Shay and Keturah from Grenada. Awesome. Cecily from Guyana. Andrea Noble from Jamaica. Natalie Rampersad from Trinidad. Sarika from Trinidad as well. Noreen from Jamaica. Lorraine from Trinidad. Jacqueline Gomez from Trinidad. Rashawn from BVI. Oh my goodness. Rochelle from St. Vincent. Jacqueline Phillips Stout. I think Jacqueline is the most common name on the platform in this session here today. Charles from, is it Dominica? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Abna from Trinidad. Tamika from BVI. Kathy from, Kathy just says good morning. Diane from BVI. Yannick from Jamaica. Jamila. Hi, Jamila. From the Service Commission Department, St. Kitts, welcome. Tamara BVI, Karen from Jamaica. Hi, Karen. Hi, Alexis. I see your camera, but you don't need to turn it on, Alexis. That's fine. You can turn off your camera, Alexis Murray. Sometimes when you put everybody puts on the camera, it just reduces the bandwidth. Cheryl Mead from Montserrat, Fiona, who is with Sandra, and Tyrese from Montserrat Public Library, Wendy Eversley from Barbados, Nola from Barbados. Let's see here, Cheryl Mead from Montserrat, Nola, let me see, Christoph Lee from Correctional Services Department, Documentations Unit, Denise from TNT, oh my goodness, Javon from Montserrat, Lands and Survey Department, Chris, oh, it is just fantastic. Thank you all so much. I see Robertine from Antigua, Chantel Bailey from Barbados, and do forgive me if I didn't get all of the names, you know, because clearly there are lots of you, and we are just so delighted to have you. And because you're all here, like I said, you almost broke the platform, I figure that, you know, this is a topic that is near and dear to your heart. Welcome, June, Stacy, and Alicia. They're all logged in together from Nalis HR. Shania Lewis from CTU, our collaborating institution. Welcome. Suzette from Barbados as well. Joyce Lynn from BVI. So tell me now, myself as well as our facilitator for today, we want to hear a little bit about your interest in this topic. And so I want to invite you to use the chat and just tell us. You can answer any of these questions. Well, first, we want to see if you can give us a green check or a red X. Hi, Denise. Is traveling? You don't need to turn on your camera, Denise. Sometimes that just uses up a lot of bandwidth. So, Denise, well, I see your camera on, but yes, there you go. So, guys, you know, for the webinar, you don't necessarily need to put on your cameras, all right? Although I know you're also beautiful, but it just uses up a lot of the bandwidth. So tell me, by giving me a green tick or a red X, how many of you are involved in any form of records digitization process at the moment? So Vernanda from Dominica gives a green check mark. Lots of people are giving green check marks. There are a couple of people who, you know, they're not involved right now, but, you know, they're still here because I think they're being proactive because guess what? If it's not happening now, it's going to be happening very soon. And it's one of the things that COVID has speeded up is the whole process of digital government digitization. So here's the other question I want you to share in the chat with us. For another minute or two, just tell us, what are some of the burning questions that you have about the process of digitization of records? We figured all of you logged in, signed up because you know, you want some answers. You want some answers. You may have some burning issues, some things you want to know. Maybe you start the process already and there are some hiccups you've come across or some questions that start to arise. Are there any burning questions you have about the process of digitization? So Francine, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, my dear. She says, you know, she's not currently involved in the process right now, but she sees it in the very near future. So Che has a question. So Che, you've been sending the questions to me privately, but I think these are questions I figure you want to share with everybody. So you can send to all participants as opposed to sending to me privately. But she's asking, what are the tools and techniques that we need to use in the process? And hopefully our facilitator today will answer some of those questions. What are some of the tools? Patricia is asking, what are some of the documents that can be digitized? All right. Charles is asking about copyright issues. Are there copyright issues we need to be mindful of, even as we go about digitizing? So people want to know about tools and techniques, copyright issues that might arise. All righty. So hold on there. The questions are coming in fast and furious. No less asking, how do we move smoothly from paper-based to digitization without leaving out information? So it's really that transition without omission. Fiona says, easiest process to digitize, easiest process of digitization in a library. So you want to know, in the context of a library, I notice a lot of persons here are joining from libraries. Kadeen is asking software recommendations. All right. Let me see what it is there. Security, oh yes. Space, so storage, rights, and policies. Security, space, rights, and the necessary policies that we need to put in place. That's another question about the kinds of software. Andre saying at the Department of Correctional Services, they've already started this process. How do you capture the metadata? And how do we store these? So my dear Emerson, I am taking notes, and I hope you are too. And we will come to some of these questions later if they are not somehow, captured through his presentation. How do we make it efficient and effective while being user-friendly for any age? Yes, we work in a multi-generational setting in many of our organizations. So we have to make it user-friendly for any age group, not just the younger sex. All right. They talk about what's the importance of data classification and data security. All right, I'm making good note of this. How do you digitize frail documents? Oh yes, a lot of our documents are starting, maybe they weren't being stored as they should have been, and they've started to become frail. How safe is digitization? How do you authenticate digital records? What are some of the legal issues that can arise from digitization of certain records? And there's always a question, how do we get staff on board? So, one of the questions are fast and furious. I see a question about how you treat with the digitization of confidential information. So thank you all so much. And we are going to kind of really get now into the meat of the matter. And so this is our topic, as you know. And just a little bit about CARICAD. We exist for the past 41 years to support our member states, 17 member states, and I think all of you in attendance here are from our various member states. And we support our member states in the area of public sector transformation. And you can well imagine that digitization, e-government, is a major part of our current reality as we look to transform our public services in the Caribbean. And so our work is guided by our Caribbean Public Service Charter, which is depicted here in this diagram, as well as the following. And if you want to learn more about that, do visit our website at caricad.net. But it is my delight to introduce to you right now our facilitator for today's session. He is none other than Mr. Emerson Bryan. And so Mr. Bryan is the author of the book, The Impact of Information Management in Caribbean Public Sector Reform, a look at Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. He operates his own information management consulting firm, Bryan Consultancies, Inc. And really, he is a certified archivist, a certified records analyst, a professional fellow of the Africa Institute for Information Management in Lagos, Nigeria. and he's currently Technical Director for the Digitization Center of the Government of Barbados. He has researched and worked in this area extensively, and so it is my pleasure to now hand over to him. He will be presenting for, say, about 30 minutes. And so after that, we will have a time of discussion and taking some of the questions you have raised already and any other new ones if we have enough time. Lyra, welcome. We're going to ask Lyra just to turn off your camera, Lyra. We don't necessarily want everybody to be having on their cameras at the same time, and we just allow for our presenter alone to have on his camera. So let me pass. So the ball is now in your court, Emerson. So you'd have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
I'm hearing you clearly.
You
can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Greetings from Barbados. Very sunny day today. Thank you all for joining me as I take you through this conversation. So first of all, there needs to be a clear understanding on what we mean by digitization. And oftentimes, there's confusion and interchangeable employment of the word scanning and digitization. They're two discrete things. They are related but discrete. Essentially, when you're talking about scanning, you're basically just, your intention is to generate an image from a paper-based information asset. And I deliberately say information asset versus a document or a record because there must be some reason why you're converting the asset and why you need to have that asset in an alternate form. So basically scanning is just converting from paper to a digital image. And that can be replicated on microfilm, microfiche, or on tape, any other media that would be basically stored in an electronic information system. Digitization is a much more complicated endeavor. This is basically converting, so similar to scanning, but the intention is to have a rendering of an image that would have some of the characteristics of the original information asset, meaning that it should have some of the attributes of a record. It must be authentic, meaning that you can basically be assured that the information asset has been created to track some kind of process. It's there to be kept as some kind of evidence. The integrity is beyond question, meaning that the information asset must be complete. There should be no gaps. It should also be accessible through time as well, meaning that regardless of the media that you're storing it in, whether it's paper, physical, or whatever, you can retrieve and utilize the asset. And you can also be assured that the information asset has been managed by some integrity process, meaning that there must be some wider policy that dictates how that information asset should be treated. So regardless of the fact that you've converted from the paper to the digital environment, you still have to give the same assurances as you would with the original record. Digitizing a very confidential document and then having the reassurances of that document in your content management or document management system, and then having the original record sitting in a parking lot or in some insecure storage area would be redundant. So you have to have a media-neutral approach in terms of your whole digitization endeavor. Also, digitization includes, the applications of control mechanisms, meaning that you can have, for example, optical character recognition, which facilitates keyword and full text searching or even Boolean searching. You also will be able to retrieve the information asset across heterogeneous devices. When I say heterogeneous devices, meaning you can access that asset from within the cloud using your personal data assistant, meaning your smartphone or a tablet or your desktop or whatever media that you use as a regular part of your work to access the information asset. You're able to retrieve that without having to concern yourself about software issues. Also, the fact that you're converting to a digital format, you want to ensure that there is some kind of control over the information asset, the digital information asset. So you have to properly index this information asset, meaning that you have to have certain metadata fields included if you want to be able to retrieve that information asset. Scanning something or digitizing something is kind of redundant. You're just basically replicating the needle in the haystack if you don't have these kind of controls in place. Your results will be too much or too many. If you try and search for something using a keyword search, for example, and it's a very popular term, and you have several documents concerning the subject matter, you're going to get like 1,000 results. That's not really helpful. You need granularity as much as possible by ensuring that you have specific metadata fields that are mandatory to support what we call discovery in the information management field. So, for example, your classification reference number, subject of the information asset, the controls that are on the information asset, meaning is it confidential, is it open, is it public, those kind of controls are very important in terms of your results. So that's also part of your indexing. So you need to have a standard metadata set that you would use to describe your information assets as a regular part of the digitization program. Also, you want to ensure that safety features such as redacting and retouching of images are possible with your digitization strategy. So, for example, redacting. That's not really something that most of us in the public service practice, And I believe that if we had a greater appreciation for redacting, which is basically blotting out what we call personally identifiable information, meaning all those areas that will be within the exempted categories of a freedom of information regime, such as somebody's name, if the person is not a public official, people's addresses, money figures, if it concerns one of those restricted areas, would be things that you can redact and still make the information asset, the digital information asset, available to those who are authorized to access same, once it falls within the acceptable categories in terms of public access. So you want to ensure that your digitization strategy and your frameworks would also allow for these types of manipulations to be supported within your processes. So what's the case for digitization? Well, first of all, you look at your bottom dollar, right? What is the business case? Where can I realize my return on investment if I should embark on a digitization exercise? Well, first of all, considering that government pays a lot of money in terms of rent for those buildings that they don't own, reducing the footprint of those filing equipment, especially if you have vertical filing solutions, would actually realize savings for these types of public entities that choose to undertake a digitization exercise. They will also be reduced turnaround in terms of certain processes. We know that for certain public front-facing services, the turnaround can be extremely lengthy because they observe an assembly line type of process in terms of somebody needs to complete a form. That form is then reviewed by one person. It's a separate person that would then do the approval. So having all of those systems automated, and not just automated, but also properly re-engineered, would produce greater turnaround. I want to emphasize that digitization on its own will not realize an automatic shorter turnaround process. You have to look at where there are redundancies, where you need to eliminate processes that are unnecessary, and cut down on the red tape that's embedded in some of these processes to support a greater turnaround or faster turnaround process. Also, in terms of collaboration, you might need to work on a matter across different departments. Having that information asset as a single point of truth, you have digitized this asset and it's sitting on your electronic document and records management platform in the cloud, would support asynchronous editing or manipulation or access to this single information asset without having to worry about, oh, what version am I looking at? Is it the version that we approved before? You're able to produce a greater assured body of work, or accomplish what you set out to accomplish in a much more efficient manner if you're able to support collaboration. And especially for those public service entities that are across disparate locations. So for example, within a foreign service type of setup, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Office of the Prime Minister or Prime Minister's Office, you know, you need to have the reassurance that you're looking at the same document and you all will have the same access, and that access can be controlled as well, because you want to support a more inclusive decision-making process, right? And as I would have mentioned, the security around these digital information assets are even better than having a physical records or physical information asset system. So instead of having to worry about who has the key to the registry, and I really abhor the term registry, they're really records management units, because they do much more than register correspondence in and out. But that records management unit, you know, need to ensure that there's no access to the information assets there. Within the digital environment, you're able to control that. All you need to do is to assign rights. You're also able to develop through structured metadata, the inability for people to attach these digital information assets to email. You restrict printing, you restrict, or you can have an expiration on the access to certain people outside of the work group through these digital environments. So it provides a better information security management capability, and this access will also be 24/7. So even outside of the regular business productive hours, you're able to enjoy access to this information asset. And also in terms of discovery, the findability. Again, in the example I gave before, in terms of granular searches, you're able to do Boolean searches and or not. You know, you're able to retrieve information assets by ensuring that there's proper tagging, ensuring that the mandatory metadata fields that you would have agreed upon will be embedded in all the digitized information assets. And you also have to protect those original information assets that are high-value assets. Take, for example, treaties, constitutions. Look at, for example, the constitution of a particular member state. You don't want that document to be handled regularly. So that document is sitting protected in an archives, while the surrogate, the digital surrogate of that information asset is accessible to everybody as it should be. So you want to ensure that if the information asset is high value or if it's also frail. And I do recall a question being put to the panel before the presentation started about those frail information assets. You know, how do you treat with those? Well, if you make a surrogate to begin with, that original information asset will be better protected. So you just deal with the surrogate information asset. And then one of the reasons why your digitization is a good thing is that the digital information asset enjoys the same recognition as the original paper, maybe even in some cases more. The best way to support, again, ensuring that the digital information asset is authentic, the integrity is assured, and it can be trusted and accessible through time, is to ensure that you have full metadata description of that information asset. And it should also be within a wider framework. So there should be retention and disposition on that information asset. It needs to be controlled by frameworks and policies and not in a vacuum. So it has to be part of a records management or information governance framework, so that this information asset can be proven in lieu of the original in a court type scenario, for example, by illustrating the date when that original information asset would have been scanned into a digital image, and then further described using the metadata sets and so forth, which then makes it a digital information asset. You're able to provide evidence of the operator, the device that would have done the capture, and so forth. With these collective components, that information asset, even though it's a digitized information asset from an original record, would stand up in court. It's not as simple as I've described it. There are many levels to it, and they're different. It's not is not really based on, it's based more, I should say, on statutes. So it's related to the statutes in the territory concerned. We know that there's a very thin compliance framework in terms of records management, including digital information asset management. And so you need to have legislative support, such as evidence legislation that will recognize this digital information asset. You need to have legislation that will support the recognition of these types of digital information assets as well within certain types of situations. So, for example, if you can couple that digital information asset with additional metadata such as job worksheets from a scanning bureau and so forth, that information asset may very well be recognized as a discoverable or a fully legal digital information asset. Again, this is something that I'm willing to explain further and provide greater insight on at the end of the presentation. And then third, and I think this is one of the most important things to keep in mind, your constituents, the people that you serve as public service entities, are resident online. Your business providers are resident online. People need to be connected to the rest of the world. So your business development partners, your digital entrepreneurs, they're on social media. They push business using cloud-based computing. They do business using the technology that's available. And so as public service entities, the larger manual processes that we observe currently need to be optimized, as I would have mentioned before, by identifying those redundancies and then automating where required, so that we can then meet the demands of these constituents in terms of providing access to digital information assets. So, for example, forms would be one of the starting points that most public services would start off with, providing the front-facing services that would require a form, for example, to be accessible online. That's a big start. You don't need to walk up to physically walk into a public service entity and request a form anymore. The form is available online, and perhaps may even be possible to submit that form. We know that since the pandemic has started, we have had to adjust. Things before that we were unable to do, such as online schooling, working remotely. Suddenly we had to do that because we had no choice. But having ready access and reliable access to information assets that typically would be requested through the registry and so forth makes a big difference. You're able to work with the assurance that you're safe in your own home. The information that you're looking on is the same information that would be in the original file. Everybody has access to it that needs to have access to it, and you can turn on processes remotely. So digitization supports all of these requirements. Now, there are different approaches in terms of how we go about a digitization exercise. The most popular would be to do a backfile conversion. Essentially, you're doing bulk scanning or bulk digitizing of information assets. So you might want to set, for example, the parameters of that exercise. You're digitizing information assets from 1993 to 2000. And backfile conversion typically is supposed to be as little disruptive as possible. So these are normal inactive information assets that you can send to a scanning bureau typically, and the scanning bureau then in turn convert these information assets. Day forward scanning, that's when you have a point forward system where you would have scanned most of your information assets into digital formats, and then moving forward now, those information assets that are processes that would typically be dependent on a paper-based process would then be utilizing, for example, an electronic form. So you don't need to be submitting a physical document anymore. You're doing these processes by submitting forms using available software that will be common across your various production areas. And then there's scan on demand. Now, scan on demand typically would be like a rush order. So within the scanning bureau, if you have, for example, information assets that you're digitizing, and then the permanent secretary of the respective MDA, ministry, department, or agency requires that information asset, for some, you know, they need to take a decision, or if there's a new permanent secretary, for example, you would then, as a person in charge of the scanning bureau, convert that paper-based information asset into a digital information asset, and then return the original to the respective MD. In that way, you would have done a rush job on demand, right? Now, this is your recommended digitization workflow. This is a best practice approach. But before we get to a digitization workflow, there needs to be clarity as to the candidates that need to be digitized. And when I say candidates, what records are going to be digitized? Oftentimes, there's a feeling by most MDAs, in my experience as a consultant through the years, that doing a wholesale capture would be the best approach. It's actually not. There are some non-records. There are non-records in most information units. There are files that are being kept that serve no purpose other than a feel-good purpose. If it's not supporting evidence or it's not required to be part of a compliance requirement in terms of it being related to a statute or some kind of policy, you really don't need to keep it. So you need to be clear in your mind the candidates that need to be included for a conversion exercise or digitization exercise. Before you can actually get to the actual capture of the information assets, you need to ensure that you can disassemble those assets. So your production team will be required to disassemble those records, removing the paper clips, the staples, the spiral binding pieces of equipment, those kind of things, and ensure that you're looking at discrete sheets of paper that can be run through the scanning device. Additionally, it's good practice to employ tools such as Separator Sheets between issues and between documents so that you can demarcate issues within the file. And it's good practice in terms of the next part of the production process, which is preparing to capture, by ensuring that you do quality checks, ensuring that there are separator sheets, and also if there are any specific requirements in terms of capture. So for example, you might need to have OCR included within the capture component, or you might just be required to produce an output in a particular file format. So for example, in most scanning bureaus, if you're looking at a graphical image, so for example, a cadastral record, that cadastral record really should be finalized or produced or outputted in TIFF. If it is a textual-based record, that information asset should really be rendered in PDF-A. Don't take my word for it. You can Google this. You can look at the authorities, NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, the TNA, the National Archives of the UK. You look at the best practice examples. In terms of capture, you want to ensure that there is no feedback or noise produced by your environment. What do I mean by that? Meaning that if you're doing digitization and you're doing capture, you don't want feedback from the light. The lighting within the room needs to be at a certain ambient level so that there is no disruption at the edges of the image, right? You want to ensure that the palette is clean, so you have to clean the glass, ensure that the rollers are clean, so you don't want things such as dust. In our case here in Barbados, we had a scenario that involved ash in some of the records. You have to ensure that the information asset itself is clean and also free from biological agents such as bugs and those kind of things. Those are things that should have been addressed before it gets to the stage where the scanning bureau would be ready to do capture. In terms of the capture, once the image has been accepted as being good, meaning that it's not crooked, it's not skewed, there are no edges being lost, there's no speckling, there are no bars or any foreign objects on the glass that would affect the image quality, then you move to the next stage. That is indexing. Now, indexing involves, as I would have said before, inputting the metadata. What is the title? Who's the creator of the information asset? Are there any copyrights inherent or any access restrictions? what are there any co-authors or shared copyrights? Are there any specific metadata fields that you need to include in terms of ensuring that you have full and total metadata inclusion for indexing? You have to ensure that there's full agreement before you actually do capture, and ensure that the operator that's doing the data entry is clear in terms of what's required as the mandatory and the non-obligatory fields in indexing. And then you do your quality control and quality assurance. Your quality control.
Dr. Emerson, sorry. My apologies. Sorry to interrupt. Just be mindful of our time. So maybe another 10 minutes for you.
Sure, no problem. I will finish within. Yes. Right.
All right.
So your quality control and quality assurance involves not just checking for the image quality, but also ensuring that there's completeness in terms of the metadata. Once the image has been deemed to be of an accepted quality, then now you're ready to reassemble that information asset in the original order that you would have received it, and then you would return it to wherever it's coming from, whether it's internal or if you need to return it to an MDA that's external to your entity. Of course, what do you do with the approved images? The best practice is to upload it to an electronic repository, whether you want to have that on-premise, meaning in a database or shared folder, or you want to have it in cloud to ensure that there's remote and asynchronous access to that information asset. That's completely up to you, but there should be some framework in place to ensure that everybody's clear about what to do. Equipment considerations. The low volume digitization and software scanners that would be common to most people. I'm sorry, motion sensitive lights in my office. The typical workhorses that you have to do scanning, facsimiles, and photocopying, that's your typical scanner, right? Those types of equipment would not be ideal to have in a scanning bureau because the volumes of documents and paper that will be scanned will be too much for that kind of equipment. So the rollers will start to go bad, it will overheat, the device will start to break down. These are not the types of information assets or information equipment that you want to have in a scanning bureau. Instead, you use what we call a high volume piece of equipment. So you can scan like 1,000 pages per minute. You want to ensure that some enterprise capture software will be included. Enterprise capture software will be those types of software that would allow for the same redacting that I spoke about before, manipulating the image, ensuring that color saturation is supported and available. And you also want to ensure that your production scanners would have what we call ISS and twin driver compatibility. What does this mean? This means that the device can interact with a multitude of software options out there. Remember that for any exercise you're going to undertake, that there are several software options out there to consider, and there are also several additional pieces of equipment that might be there as part of the intermediate process, such as, for example, a flatbed that might allow for scanning of oversized documents, for example, and you need to ensure that there's twin compatibility there. Also, in terms of ensuring dual side scanning and so forth. Mindful of the time. Additional software and hardware considerations. You want to ensure that you have flatbed capability because, again, if the document is too frail, you can't run it through an ADF, which is an automatic document feed. You have to put it flatbed and capture it to ensure that the document is not further destroyed or damaged. Also, in terms of the monitors would adhere to a certain standard because you need to be able to see a reflection of the true color of the actual information asset. So you want to ensure that you also have the processing speeds that you would need to run a production, high-level production process within a scanning bureau. Also, unlimited power supply. If the power goes, you don't want to lose your job. So you want to ensure that you have uninterrupted power available. And then having access to certain devices such as tablets and so forth, so that you can support tracking and your production process. Also shredders, because if you're dealing with highly confidential information assets, and in some cases, within the scanning bureau, you might need to have capture and then destruction following immediately from the production process. The types of software that you also need to consider as well. Capture software. Is your capture software equipped to deal with the volume of scan jobs that you're planning on included? Do you have optical character recognition capabilities, indexing, and quality assurance and quality control? You need to ensure that you can manipulate the information assets as needed, depending on the requirements of the client or ministry, department, or agency concerned. And very importantly, throughout the entire process, and this is where my information management hat now, or my records management hat, you need to ensure you have end-to-end chain of custody. So from the file is being scanned at the very start to when it's being returned, if it's not to be destroyed, you need to be able to keep, give account for the information asset. You need to know where that file is at all times. Who has it? Is it complete? Has it been tampered with? And that kind of thing. Having a barcode information asset management system will allow for that tracking to be available across the dashboard, so everybody will have access or some ability to track each box and file that is put through the production process. File and equipment, records trolleys, because you don't want people lifting boxes of records all the time. And you need to ensure that the information assets are transported to the various stations safely, because the file is more vulnerable when it's disassembled. So you have to ensure that when you're transporting the information asset internally, that you don't have accidents such as the file falling apart and then becoming commingled with another ministry's information assets. So you need to be mindful of that. Records boxes, because you want to have a standard unit of measure in terms of storage. Because scanning bureau should typically, it will operate almost like a record center. So you need to be able to determine at any given time how much available storage you have, so that you know how many records you can take in, and you need to keep track of the records that are going out as well. Separator sheets, as I would have mentioned before, would allow for separation of the various parts of the file, so that you can have that granular indexing being done. So you can specify, for example, within a file that may deal with several subjects, the unique issues and the specific subject concern. I would have mentioned before about the production area. The environment needs to be considered in terms of lighting, ambient lighting, cleaning. There should be regular cleaning in the space to ensure that dust doesn't build up in the production or the staging area. You also need to ensure that people are safe. Now, in terms of COVID-19, you don't want people that are working closer together to be impacted because of the COVID virus. So you have to stagger and stage your area in such a way that, because scanning is such a close-knit execution, that you're keeping all of these things in view. And also with respect to scanning bureau, if it is that you're converting information assets that are high-value information assets, such as assets that deal with national security, diplomatic relations, and so forth, you may want to keep the location of your scanning bureau confidential, so that people don't show up there and it becomes a situation where you have to reevaluate your security concerns. Output considerations. Typically, most scanning bureaus would render images at between 400 to 600 pixels per inch. So you want to ensure that the resolution is of a quality that you can basically have the reassurance that the surrogate image in lieu of the original will be accepted. Image compression, lossless and lossiness. Now, these are technical terms. The ideal thing is to have lossless compression, meaning each time you retrieve the digital surrogate information asset, that when it decompresses, that it doesn't degrade. It doesn't get worse off. I don't know how many of you would have remembered looking at pictures that you would have uploaded to Facebook, for example, 3 years ago or so. Each time you go and retrieve that picture, you realize that the quality has fallen, all right? That's because there's lossy being experienced. So there's decompression and compression each time you access that image, and you have to keep that in mind as you deal with your output considerations. In terms of image metadata, the EXIF format would typically be related to like your digital cameras, for example. It gives geolocation tags. It prompts you in terms of naming files and so forth. It's very intuitive. but the IPTC format would be a more manual process. Why am I even mentioning these? You want to ensure that there is ease of use as much as possible so that the operator would be able to provide as much contextual information as possible as they go through the conversion process. Image color management, why is this also important? You want to have a faithful rendering of the original information asset, the physical information asset. So you need to ensure that the hues, the color is as close to the original as possible. So these are all things that can become very important in a scanning bureau, for example, that supports a Ministry of National Security, a Ministry of Justice, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If it is that scanning bureau will be supporting a client that would need to, for example, produce these digital surrogates in a climate where the law might come into play, you want to ensure that these things are addressed. In terms of file formats, it's good to have a master file, a master image file, and a derivative file. What do I mean by this? A master file will be a high resolution rendering. So for example, you can render in PDF-A or TIFF, and then you keep that as a potential archival image. And then the surrogate or derivative asset now will be in JPEG 2000, for example, because again, the lossiness that I mentioned before, the production masters typically will be high resolution, and you want to ensure that that high resolution information asset is not accessed too regularly, because you want to ensure that the maintenance of the quality will not be impaired. And again, optical character recognition for output considerations, tagging the image with the necessary fields, and indexing. Now, ISO 15836, which is Dublin Core metadata set, allows for 15 fields to be considered in terms of your metadata set. There is no turnkey solution in terms of records management, because records management is very specific and subjective in terms of the organization concerned, unlike librarianship, which has duodecimal and universal decimal system. The Dublin Core allows for that digital information asset that's been converted to be tagged with mandatory and obligatory metadata fields, right? And of course, you have your naming conventions. Everybody should be saving the files, the digital files, in a particular manner. There should be some adherence to a folder system, and everybody should be on the same page. It should be articulated in an operational manual. And of course, quality control and assurance. You have to keep testing. You need to ensure you test the calibration of monitors, scanning devices, testing to ensure that the quality is maintained right across the production process. I'm sorry if I'm going really fast, but I'm mindful of the time. Additional standards to consider. Well, first, there are standards to consider in terms of conversion or migration, because ultimately, for most of us in the public services, there's already a legacy system in place. So there's probably an enterprise content management platform or an electronic document management system in place. Can the rendered images be migrated to this platform, or do you need to pull from that platform into a new platform? If it is that you're looking at pulling from a legacy system, you need to look at these standards in terms of digitization of records, and looking at how it relates to ISO 15489, which is records management standard. And of course, to track the entire thing, your information security management concerns. You don't want people to be able to access the digital images. So you need to ensure that wherever you're uploading the rendered images is safe and secure, and the physical information assets, after you've digitized them, are being stored in suitable accommodations. The most important part of it, your human capital. First of all, you want to ensure that you have people that know what they're doing to manage your digitization production. They need somebody that has an appreciation for doing this kind of work, because it's a very specific kind of work. It's not a simple exercise where you put a piece of paper in a device and press scan, and that's it. It's much more complicated than that. You need a trained production team to support the different parts of the production workflow that I would have illustrated earlier. You need your IT people. Why? Because devices do break down. There are software issues that need to be troubleshooted, and so you need to have properly trained IT people. Quality assurance. The quality assurance person will be tracking the production process. If it is that there's a redundant process inherent in your production, you need to identify that and get around that. Because if we need to skip a step because it seems to be redundant, you need to qualify that omission through some structured process. And that's where a quality assurance person will come in. you want to ensure that there is proper records keeping being adhered to and that the production team is appropriately trained. So yes, we've been talking about digitization. Well, digitization also additionally gets confused with digitalization. They are not the same. So digitalization uses the digitized information assets to support the automation of business processes for optimization. Now, this digitalization, supports digital transformation, which of course is a big picture thing. This is looking at solving the problem of the countries, ensuring that people-centered issues are addressed. Most of your services are to meet some kind of demand. So are you serving that demand? Are you able to support your constituents as you're required to do? And of course, that service obligation should be possible within a digital environment. Most people would rather to access these services using the devices rather than to come in, COVID or no COVID, into a public service entity because it's just easier. It's easier, so you have to try and meet all of these demands. Post-digitalization considerations. What do you do with the original information asset? Are they subject to a retention and disposition program, for example? It's not enough to have a digital information asset being stored on a platform, but you also need to think about, all right, if it is that I need to destroy this digital surrogate or digital information asset, would the original be destroyed as well? What about a point-forward plan? You have converted all of these information assets. When you send the file back to the ministry, what happens to that file? Do you destroy the file? Are documents added to that file? These are things that need to have agreement on before you actually send the information asset off to the scanning bureau. And then where the information asset is going to be stored? Are you storing them on premise in a database, shared drive, or are you storing them in the cloud? And if you're storing them in the cloud, are there cybersecurity issues included? So you can have that reassurance that for those information assets that cover issues that are exempted from freedom of information, that they're protected. And then who's involved in developing the policies? Is the records management team around the table, or is it just IT? Are the policymakers and the compliance people there, the legal department, the finance department? Who's having this conversation about digitization? It should not be in a vacuum. It should be as collaborative and inclusive as possible, within reason. And then we do these types of exercises all the time across the region, but we don't share experiences. And so oftentimes you end up having to employ an approach that may have had a challenge in another jurisdiction. And we're not saying that no two jurisdictions are the same, but it's useful when we can have that conversation where we can look at these issues specifically, outside of the wider conversation about all the other IT issues, looking at e-government and m-government and these things, but looking at digitization and having that specific conversation about these issues. So I will yield here, and I will take in questions at this moment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Emerson. Thank you so much. So while I get the ball back, there were so many questions. Now, to be fair, many of the questions I think you touched on in your presentation. But there is, as you know, in the interest of time, we probably can't get every single one. But there is one that jumped out at me. How do you handle a digitization process where it's a hybrid situation, meaning you are dealing with both paper conversion as well as some electronic sources? That came from Nicholas from CXC.
Okay, so my quick answer to that is to forget about the medium. Is to have an overall information governance framework in place. Your information governance framework should ensure that you have what we call a defensible solution, meaning that the same treatment that you expect to apply to that original information asset. If it's confidential, it's confidential. It's an HR record that needs to be accessible only to the HR professional authorized to access them. you have to ensure that this information asset is also subjected to those kind of controls. In terms of the additional tools that you need in terms of the platforms, meaning the file management solutions, the computer-related equipment that you need to have included, and maybe possibly information systems, meaning they have a human resource information system or financial management information system that's linked into that digital information asset, that whatever applies in terms of how long you're supposed to keep the information asset, the types of data protection assurances that are supposed to be included to that information asset would be applicable right across the board. You know, there's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations from the European Union, that has basically defined how we across the region would deal with data protection issues. Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, and a few other countries would have GDPR compatible data protection frameworks in place in terms of how you're supposed to share that information. Any information that deals with personally identifiable information should have the same treatment. Matters not the platform.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Emerson. Quite a few people raised questions about what are some of the legal issues that one could encounter. And not that I am an expert as yourself, but there's something that you said in response, in part of your presentation, we talked about inclusiveness. So any digitization process, you can't just have one set of persons, one set of stakeholders in the room. And so I would hasten to say, similarly with the legal issues, you can't go down the path and start to create policies without, getting the legal opinion, the legal advice, whether your MD has a legal department, or it might be something that you need to get some legal advice from the Attorney General's department. But do get your legal advice, get your legal people involved, especially if you recognize that the digitization process is part of a wider policy change that's probably going to require, establishment of new laws, new regulations. Try and get even your chief parliamentary counsel, the people who do the legal drafting, to get them involved, not way at the back end, but start to get them involved quite early. So you would, in fact, minimize some of those kinds of hurdles, because they've gotten the advice, they were included as a part of an inclusive project team, and hopefully you would have checked all the, the boxes as it relates to the legal issues and requirements. Emerson, am I right? You want to add to that?
Yes. If I may add to that, risk is never done in a vacuum. It includes a conversation with the legal department, as you quite rightly pointed out, and then if you have a compliance officer. If I may, I know that we're also doing a lot in terms of health information management solutions across the region, and we're looking at scanning or digitizing medical records, and also to support contact tracing in terms of the various what would typically be paper-based driven processes into a solution that you can have like a dashboard where you can see everybody's information. But bear in mind that I agree that having that conversation at the forefront of the process would be more helpful than at the end, because guess what? We don't have frameworks in place that would be compatible with higher level frameworks such as health information and portability and personal privacy, or anything that relates closer to HIPAA. Again, we have data protection considerations. How is that information that's been digitized being treated? How long do you keep that information? What systems are the various pieces of information resident on? Who's ensuring that the disposition of this information is being done? So we tend to jump ahead. We know we need to do it. We need to share the information and so forth. But where is the policy in place? So we do digitization almost like pitch patchy. We start to build the systems and the platforms, and then at the back end, we start to frame a policy in place. What really ought to have been the approach is to have a policy framework in place for any digitalization exercise, and then the outputs, the products, and the frameworks would then follow suit. But again, we know that we've had no choice but to embark upon the approach that most countries have been adhering to now because of the pandemic. It took us by surprise.
All right, thank you. So we are coming down to the end, and so I want to make sure just to capture a couple of the questions. So Gerald has a question. What's the best practice for encrypting/storing the scanned data? And there is a question about verification of the verification process after digitization. Is it worthwhile or is it too time consuming?
Right. Let me take the second question first. In terms of validation, it's very important that the respective ministry, department, and agency that would have sent their information assets to the scanning bureau do that validation. The validation supports an acceptance. I've accepted the product, the goods that you have turned out to me at the end of the various processes. It's very important that you do that sampling to ensure that where your high-value information assets are resident, that you're satisfied with the production process. So that's the second question. In terms of the first question, ensuring encryption and greater assurances in terms of security for the converted information assets, I think that we need to look more at blockchain technology. Blockchain technology would support not just the encryption, but also allowing for the tracking of that right through the entire process of how you go about doing this digitization activity. So from capture to indexing and everything, blockchain can actually support that, and it can be used to encrypt that same information asset. And who needs to have access to it will enjoy access to it. You understand? So I think that we need to look at more greater utilization of blockchain technology. I know that we typically tend to associate blockchain technology with Bitcoin, but blockchain is much more than that. I think that blockchain actually will revolutionize records management, and we need to learn more about it and get more people looking at the different avenues that we can employ to maximize the potential of our digital transformation processes. It's way beyond records management, but looking at transactions and so forth. So I would say look at blockchain technology. Hello, are we still connected?
My apologies.
Sorry.
Yes. One takeaway, 30 seconds, one key takeaway that you want the participants to leave with. I mean, there's so many, but if there's that one thing that you're saying, if nothing else, remember this.
Well, this is unprecedented territory. I just bear in mind that for most of us here in the Caribbean or in the region, in the community, this is unprecedented territory for us. We're learning as we're going through the process, and it's very important that we share and document. I think that it's better for us to write our own stories and our own experiences than to have a consultant. Again, no disrespect to consultants. I'm an international consultant myself, but having somebody external to the community coming in to write, for us, our experiences. Let us document and sit down and have a wider conversation. Let us have a wider conversation. This is just one of several conversations that I'm hoping that CARICAD and other community institutions will start to push. There are so many other areas pushing digitization. There's single electronic trade window. There's digital platforms to track health-related records. There's the need for digitization for border control. There's so many applications that we can look at. We should have that wider conversation and then a more discrete conversation related to the various sectors to ensure that we come up with the best solution that would have been informed through experience by some entity or some other jurisdiction that's similar to us and not external. If there's one thing I can say, I know it was a mouthful.
No, we got it. No, we are learning a lot, and we need to not only learn quickly, but share rapidly. We don't have to go it alone. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And certainly we at CARICAD are happy to have started this dialogue, and we certainly are hoping for other avenues so we can continue that dialogue. And so if the presentation that Emerson made is going to be sent to you, we are going they are recording, so the recording will also be made available. And you will see in the presentation, in the slides that you will receive, Emerson's contact details. And if you want to contact us as well, you know, about these various matters, contact us at info@caricad.net. And just by way of announcement, the call for applications are now out for our transformational leadership development program. You want to learn more about that, just email us at info@caricad.net and just follow us on our various social media pages and check out our website at caricad.net for all the services that we offer, and you can reach out to us for any ways in which you think we can assist you. So, on behalf of all of us, Emerson, my friend, thank you so very much. We look forward to further collaboration with you. And before we leave, I'm going to invite us just to complete our very short evaluation poll. We believe here that feedback is a gift, and we want to hear from you. There is a poll right now, so just quickly take a minute to just fill out the poll and let us know how you found this session here today. And do reach out to us. Reach out to myself, reach out to Emerson if you have questions around the digitization of records process. It is just something that we can't afford to be on the back foot any longer. We have to embrace this change. We have to move forward. It is an absolute necessity, as this pandemic has taught us. But even beyond the pandemic, we don't want to just be reacting to, you know, circumstances. We want to be the proactive innovators in this field in the Caribbean. I believe it is quite possible. So let's keep the dialogue going. Reach out to us. Let us see how we can collaborate. And if you're having successes in your digitization process, we want to hear about those as well, so we can share those stories and we can continue to learn together as we continue to develop our leadership in this area. Thank you all very, very much. And as soon as you've completed the poll, you're free to exit the session. So thank you for joining. Thank you for those who will listen to the recording, who are not here live as well. And do have a productive rest of the week. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Okay.